They say one man's trash is another man's treasure. But for Mark, a $500 bid at a local auction wasn't about the money. It was about a single locked wooden chest hidden under a pile of old blankets in the corner of a forgotten storage unit in Scranton, Pennsylvania. The air in the unit smelled of mothballs and 50 years of stagnant time. Mark had spent his life savings on this gamble, looking for vintage furniture or maybe some old tools. Little did he know, opening that chest would restart a mystery that the FBI had abandoned in 1974. The screen is dark. The only sound is the heavy breathing of a man and the metallic scrape of a crowbar against a rusted latch. A flashlight beam cuts through the darkness, illuminating thick layers of dust dancing in the air. We see a close-up of a rusted padlock snapping open. Narration. They say one man's trash is another man's treasure. But for Mark, a $500 bid at a local auction wasn't about the money. It was about a single locked wooden chest hidden under a pile of old blankets in the corner of a forgotten storage unit in Scranton, Pennsylvania. The air in the unit smelled of mothballs and 50 years of stagnant time. Mark had spent his life savings on this gamble, looking for vintage furniture or maybe some old tools. Little did he know, opening that chest would restart a mystery that the FBI had abandoned in 1974. The screen is dark. The only sound is the heavy breathing of a man and the metallic scrape of a crowbar against a rusted latch. A flashlight beam cuts through the darkness, illuminating thick layers of dust dancing in the air. We see a close-up of a rusted padlock snapping open. Mark had been flipping storage units for 3 years, but he had never seen anything like this. Beneath the lid lay a collection of items that felt like a time capsule from a darker era. There was a leather-bound ledger, a heavy brass key with a handwritten tag, and a stack of grainy black and white surveillance photographs. But it was the folder at the bottom that stopped his heart. It was a manila envelope, yellowed with age, stamped with the words, Department of Justice, classified. As Mark spread the photos out on the dusty floor of the unit, he realized he wasn't looking at family memories. These were photos of men in trench coats standing outside a diner, photos of a black sedan parked near a pier, and in every single photo there was a man with a distinctive scar across his left cheek. Mark pulled out his phone and did a quick search for unsolved FBI cases 1974. The first result made his blood run cold. It was the disappearance of Anthony the Architect Moretti, a man who was supposed to testify against the highest levels of the state government before he vanished into thin air on a rainy November night in 1974. The FBI had closed the file in the 90s, citing a lack of evidence. But here, in a $500 storage unit, was the evidence the world thought was burned. Mark couldn't sleep. He spent the next 48 hours piecing together the ledger. It wasn't just a book, it was a payroll. It detailed a massive corruption ring that had fueled the construction boom of the 1970s. But the most confusing part was the owner of the storage unit. Records showed the unit had been paid for in a lump sum, 50 years in advance, by a man named Arthur Sterling. Mark went to the local library, digging through microfilms of old newspapers. He found Arthur Sterling. He wasn't a criminal. He was the lead FBI field agent assigned to the Moretti case in 1974. Why would a federal agent hide the evidence? Mark whispered to himself. He looked back at the brass key he found in the chest. The tag on the key had a set of coordinates scrawled on the back. They pointed to a location just 20 miles outside of town, an old abandoned coal mine that had been shut down since the Great Depression. Mark knew he should call the police. He knew he should walk away. But the look in Moretti's eyes in those surveillance photos, a look of pure terror, haunted him. He felt a responsibility to a man who had been forgotten by history. Mark's car driving down a lonely wooded road at dusk. The headlights cut through a thick fog. He reaches an old iron gate. He gets out, holding a flashlight and the brass key. The woods felt alive with the ghosts of the past. Mark hiked for 2 miles until he found the entrance to the mine. It was a jagged hole in the side of a hill, reinforced with rotting timber. Following the coordinates, he pushed deeper into the earth, the temperature dropping with every step. In the furthest corner of the primary shaft, he found it. A small steel locker bolted to the stone wall. The brass key slid into the lock as if it had been greased yesterday. Click. Inside the locker wasn't more paper. It was a tape recorder, a heavy reel-to-reel Ewer 4000. Beside it sat a small velvet box. Mark opened the box first. Inside was a gold wedding band and a note to tiny handwriting saying, "To my daughter, Sarah, I'm sorry I couldn't come home. Tell the truth for me." Mark hit the play button on the recorder. The tape hissed for a moment, and then a tired, gravelly voice filled the cavern. "This is Agent Arthur Sterling. If you're hearing this, I'm likely long gone. I found Moretti. He didn't run. He was taken by my own partners. The Bureau is compromised. I couldn't take this to the office. I'd be dead before I hit the front door. I've hidden the witness in the one place they'll never look. I'm staying with him to keep him alive until I can find one honest man to hand this to." The tape ended with the sound of a door kicking open and 3 distinct gunshots. Then silence. Mark sat in his car looking at the wedding ring. Fade to a shot of a modern-day office building. We see Mark meeting an elderly woman in a park. Narration. Mark realized that the storage unit wasn't a criminal's hideout. It was an agent's last stand. Arthur Sterling had died protecting the truth, and his trash had sat in the dark for 50 years, waiting for someone to be curious enough to bid on it. Mark didn't go to the local police. Instead, he spent weeks tracking down Sarah, the daughter mentioned in the note. She was now 70 years old, living a quiet life in Virginia, having spent 50 years wondering why her father never came home that rainy November night in 1974. When Mark handed her the ring and played the tape, the weight of 50 years of silence finally broke. The evidence in the ledger was handed over to the Department of Justice's Internal Affairs. While many of the men named in the book were already dead, the discovery led to the clearing of Arthur Sterling's name. He had been labeled a deserter for decades. Now he was recognized as a hero who gave his life to protect a witness. Visual. A shot of the storage unit, now empty and clean. The door is pulled down and locked. Narration. Mark walked away from the experience without a fortune. The $500 he spent on the auction didn't buy him a Ferrari or a mansion. But as he watched the news report of Arthur Sterling's posthumous Medal of Valor, he knew he had found something better. They say one man's trash is another man's treasure, but Mark reflected, sometimes it's not about the value of the object, it's about the value of the soul that left it behind. Visual. Black screen with white text, dedicated to the truth seekers. Narration. What would you do if you found a secret that could change history? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories of the mysteries hidden in plain sight, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. Visual. Slow cinematic drone shots of a gray industrial skyline, rusty water towers, abandoned brick factories, and rows of modest houses. The weather is overcast. Classic Pennsylvania late autumn. Narration. This is Erie, Pennsylvania, a town built on steel, coal, and hard work. But when the factories closed, the people here had to get creative to survive. Meet Mark. Mark isn't a corporate executive or a high-stakes gambler. He's a regular guy with a beat-up Ford F-150 and a keen eye for what others throw away. Visual. Mark is shown drinking coffee in his truck, looking at a clipboard. He looks tired but determined. Narration. For the last 5 years, Mark has made his living flipping storage units. It's a brutal business. You bid on the contents of a locker without ever stepping inside. You might find a vintage Harley Davidson worth 20 grand, or you might find 500 pounds of literal garbage. Today, Mark is down to his last few $100s. In the world of storage auctions, he's one bad bid away from going broke. Visual. A crowd of 20 people standing in front of a row of blue garage doors at Steel City Storage. The auctioneer, a fast-talking man in a high-vis vest, steps up to Unit 402. Narration. The atmosphere at a storage auction is thick with a strange kind of electricity. It's a mix of desperation and greed. Mark stands at the back, his hands deep in his pockets, watching his competitors. There's Big Al, who has deep pockets, and the Vultures, a pair of brothers who buy everything just to sell it for scrap. Visual. The lock is cut. The door rattles upward. The camera peeks inside.
It looks like a mess of old furniture and boxes. Narration. The rules are simple. You get 60 seconds to look from the doorway. You can't go in, you can't touch. Mark's heart hammers against his ribs. He sees a mountain of old moth-eaten wool blankets and some rusted garden tools. It looks like a loser unit, but then his flashlight catches something in the very back corner, the edge of something dark and wooden. The bidding starts. I've got 100, who'll give me 2? 200, 300. The auctioneer is a rhythmic chant. Big Al bows out at 400. The vultures are hesitating. Mark feels a bead of sweat roll down his neck. This is it, his rent money, his grocery money. 500, Mark shouts, his voice cracking slightly. The auctioneer looks around. 500 once, 500 twice, sold to the man in the blue cap, visual. The crowd moves on to...
Mark looks around the dark unit, suddenly feeling very exposed. He starts packing the items back into the chest, his movements frantic. He looks at the X on the map again. Mark realized he hadn't just bought a locker full of junk. He had bought the key to the most famous disappearance in American history. If Jimmy Sullivan was here and he left these keys and this map, then the ghost Mustang wasn't just a car. It was a getaway vehicle that never got away. The question was, if Jimmy left the chest here, where did he go? And more importantly, who was still looking for it? Mark pulls the rolling door down and locks it. He walks toward his truck as the sun sets, looking over his shoulder. In the next episode, we are following that hand-drawn map into the heart of the Allegheny Forest to find the X. We're going to see if the ghost Mustang is still waiting in the dark. What do you think happened to Jimmy Sullivan? Was he hiding or was he hidden? Tell me your theories in the comments. This is just getting started. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the trip to the forest. Thanks for watching. The storage unit was just the beginning. The map Mark found, drawn on the back of a 1974 diner menu, didn't lead to a bank or a safe house. It led to the dead zone, an area on the outskirts of town where the old steel mills once stood, now reclaimed by the forest. As the GPS signal on his phone flickered and died, Mark realized he was truly on his own. He wasn't just following a map, he was following a dead man's trail. The journey through the wilderness. Mark steps out of his truck. He's wearing a rain jacket, holding the map in one hand and a high-powered flashlight in the other. Cinematic sound, the heavy thud of the truck door closing, followed by the rhythmic crunch of boots on wet leaves and snapping twigs. The property was a graveyard of American industry, rusted fences, collapsed chimneys, and no trespassing signs that had long since faded into illegibility. According to the map, the X was located behind an old farmhouse that had burned down in the late 80s. Cinematic transition. The wind begins to howl through the skeletal trees. Mark stops, his flashlight beam hitting a pair of glowing eyes in the brush, a deer which bolts away. He breathes heavily, his breath visible in the cold air. Mark's heart was hammering. Every snap of a branch sounded like a footstep behind him. He kept thinking about the photo of Jimmy Sullivan. Was he still out here, or was he buried beneath the very ground Mark was walking on? The approach, the hidden structure. Mark pushes through a thick wall of overgrown ivy and thorny vines. Suddenly, his flashlight hits a flat metallic surface. It's an old corrugated metal shed, almost entirely swallowed by nature. He almost missed it. Hidden behind a wall of thorns was a shed that looked like it hadn't been opened in half a century. The structure was miraculously intact, protected by the dense canopy of trees. Mark approached the door. A heavy industrial chain was wrapped around the handles, secured by a lock that was caked in orange rust. This was it, the moment where the legend became reality. Mark reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver keys with the pony logo, the keys to the car that didn't exist. Close-up on Mark's shaking hand. He wipes the grime off the lock. He inserts the key. Sound design. A tense, high-pitched violin note pulls tight. The key turns with a heavy, satisfying clack. The climax, the ghost Mustang. Mark throws the doors open. A cloud of thick white dust billows out. He shines his light inside. The beam hits a chrome bumper that glints like a diamond in the dark. As the dust clears, a Highland green 1968 Ford Mustang Fastback is revealed. It was beautiful, and it was impossible. The car sat there, perfectly preserved in the dry air of the shed. No rust, no flat tires. It looked as if it had been driven off the showroom floor yesterday and hidden away for a rainy day that never came. This was the ghost Mustang, a machine built for a getaway that was interrupted by history. But as Mark moved toward the driver's side, he saw something resting on the steering wheel. It was a cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax. His name wasn't on it. It was addressed to whoever finds the truth. Mark opens the envelope. He reads the letter by the light of his flashlight. We see snippets of the handwriting. I couldn't stay. The money is buried. They're coming. The letter was the final confession of the man who disappeared. It explained everything, the corruption, the betrayal, and the reason why this car was never driven. The last line of the letter read, "If you are reading this, the secret is now yours. But remember, the people who wanted me gone never stopped looking for this car." Mark looked into the rearview mirror of the Mustang, and for a split second, he saw a pair of headlights appearing at the edge of the property, slowly turning down the dirt path towards the shed. Mark's eyes go wide. He turns off his flashlight. Fade to black. The mystery of Locker 402 was solved, but a much more dangerous race had just begun. What was the secret mentioned in the letter, and who just pulled into the driveway? Find out in the series finale. Comment Mustang if you want the final part right now. Don't forget to subscribe. You don't want to miss the trip to the forest. Thanks for watching. Mark sits in the driver's seat of the 1968 Mustang, the envelope trembling in his hand. The interior of the car smells of old leather and preserved history. Outside, the rain has slowed to a drizzle. As Mark sat in the quiet of that hidden shed, the world outside seemed to vanish. He began to read the letter, and the mystery of Locker 402 finally began to make sense. It wasn't a story of a criminal on the run. It was the story of a father's desperate love. The letter was written by a man named David Miller. In 1974, David was a lead engineer for a massive industrial corporation that dominated the Rust Belt. He had discovered a dark secret. The company was knowingly dumping toxic chemicals into the local water supply, poisoning the very town that worked in its factories. When David tried to blow the whistle, the corporation didn't just fire him, they threatened his family. They made it clear, if David spoke, his wife and his 5-year-old son Leo would pay the price. David Miller knew he couldn't win against a giant. To protect his family, he did the only thing he could. He disappeared. He staged a scene to make it look like he had abandoned them, knowing the corporation would stop watching a family that no longer had the man they feared. He spent the rest of his life in the shadows, working under an assumed name, paying for a storage unit for 50 years in advance. He left the Mustang, the car he had promised to teach his son to drive, and the documents that proved the corporation's guilt, hoping that one day, when the giants had fallen, his son would find the truth. But David died in 2021, alone, never getting the chance to say goodbye. The search for Leo. Mark is back in his truck, laptop open. He's looking through digital archives. He finds a social media profile, Leo Miller, age 56, living in a quiet suburb outside of Cleveland. Mark knew what he had to do. The Mustang wasn't his to sell. The secret wasn't his to keep. He spent the next 3 days tracking down the boy from the photograph, now a man in his mid-50s. Mark loaded the Highland green Mustang on a flatbed trailer. He polished the chrome one last time. He put the leather-bound ledger and the 1974 Polaroids into a neat box. As he drove across the state line into Ohio, he realized he wasn't just delivering a car, he was delivering a father's reputation. The emotional payoff, the reunion.
The truck and trailer pull up in front of a modest, well-kept house with a porch swing. An older man with gray hair, Leo, is watering his garden. He looks up, confused by the classic car on the trailer. Leo Miller had spent 50 years believing his father was a coward who had walked on a wife and a 5-year-old son. He had grown up with a hole in his heart that no amount of time could fill. When Mark stepped out of the truck and called his name, Leo was guarded. But then Mark handed him the velvet box containing the wedding ring and the stack of Polaroids. Cinematic sound. The background music fades into a soft acoustic guitar melody, the sound of birds chirping and the wind in the trees. Leo's hands shake as he looks at the photo of himself as a child, held by his father. He stops at the letter. He reads it slowly. His eyes well up with tears. He collapses onto the porch step, the weight of 50 years of misunderstanding finally lifting. "He didn't leave us," Leo whispered, his voice cracking. "He was protecting us." Mark watched as Leo walked toward the Mustang. The man's hand brushed the green paint, his fingers tracing the same lines his father had polished decades ago. In that moment, the $500 storage unit auction was forgotten. The potential profit was meaningless. Mark saw a man finally find peace. The conclusion and legacy. Mark and Leo are sitting on the porch together. The sun is setting, casting a golden glow over the classic car in the driveway. Leo told Mark that he didn't want the money from the car. He wanted to finish what his father started. He took the documents to a legal team that specializes in environmental justice. The company that threatened David is long gone.